Hello folks, welcome to Legacy IAS. In today's video, we'll be looking into Europe's Dark Ages and its Renaissance. We'll see how this had an impact on Europe and how it impacted India. During the phase of 14th, 15th century, Europe was undergoing a crisis. A crisis would be a short term to tell, for what it was having was a mixture of crises. One such thing was a great famine. Another thing was Black Death or Bubonic Plague. When people were scared, when they were starting to have all these things, they didn't know what to do. They resorted to civil wars. They resorted to revolts. That led to Wars of Roses, 100 Years' War. Among all this, when everything that they are able to see is under distress, one thing they rely on is religiousness. Okay, even that was under attack when the unity of Roman Catholic Church was shattered. This was the same time that the Roman Empire also had declined. Now, under these scenarios, let's see how each one of them impacted or what gave its way to Renaissance. The first one being your Bubonic Plague. Now, Bubonic Plague or Black Death as we call it almost ate up 1/3 of the population. People didn't know what is causing this. People didn't know what was needed to do to stop this. People didn't have a means or a vaccine to stop this at the beginning. They were scared, petrified, they didn't know what to do. Their loved ones are being lost in front of their own eyes. It was a period of gore. It was a period of death. It was a period of mass death, which made them lose their humaneness. This period resulted in a very large scale pain, loss, and destruction. As we move on, plague pandemic as the name states, but this has been the most fatal pandemic that the world has experienced. It amassed almost 1/3 of the population to an extent that the population was almost losing itself, not just physically but also mentally. This plague created religious, social, and economic upheavals and had profound effects on the course of European history. What does this mean? See, at this point of time, the society is scared more than anything. It is not knowing what to do and it is not knowing what has caused it. A section of people thought that this is caused by curse. A section of people thought that this has come as a relief from God to save people. Okay, all that overcrowding, population in cities, everything now started falling. Certain sections started seeing as this is God's way of helping us. The fanaticism had developed. This had created a very vast negative impact on the society on all aspects. This also created a scenario where thinkers now stopped caring or thinking or giving much importance to what happens in the afterlife. Rather, they started thinking, what are we supposed to do in this life to make our lives better, to make sure our loved ones are protected, to make sure that our loved ones will have a long life. Okay, this created a sense of humanism, a sense of man is a priority. The life that we live now is very important. Along with this along with the Black Death that is already going on, coupled with that came a great famine. Now, what is it? Let's see. Now, the great famine that came in, it came in the form of excessive rainfall. It was not due to lack of rainfall, but due to excessive rainfall. But because of excessive rainfall, the crops couldn't yield fruits. They couldn't store grains. They couldn't store hay for their cattle. They couldn't dry their grasses, which meant they had to all store whatever they had in the indoors in pots and pans, which means they had to be brined in salt so that it could stay for a longer time. Even the salt price had become so exorbitant because that was the need of the hour. Everyone needed salt to make sure that they can increase the shelf life of their produce. Under this condition, half the population is having diseases, half the population is not having food. Under this kind of turmoil, under this kind of condition, grew way to a new thing. That is what is called your Renaissance. Amidst all this chaos, amidst all this pain, amidst all this suffering, now they started wanting to find answers, give everything a scientific reasoning, a scientific understanding as to why this is happening, why am I facing this, why am I losing my loved ones. It became a pain, it became a concern, it became an extent that became the need of the hour, rather than what is going to happen to me after I die. Whether will I have heaven or will I have hell, that did not matter. The only thing that mattered is what is going to happen to me, what is going to happen to my loved ones became a priority. Thus was born humanism. Thus was born a new thinking that created a scientific temper. A scientific tempo was involved in almost every single field. Art, literature, science, medicine, name it, everything. They started looking at everything in a form of scientific overtones. This created whatever we call it as Renaissance. Amidst all the darkness, amidst all the death, amidst all the pain, amidst all the chaos, was born Renaissance, was born a scientific temper. The people wanted to see life for what it was, for rather than what it will be. Okay? Now, amidst all these things, as we said, Renaissance was born. Renaissance, when it was born, it became a ground. A ground for what? Look at this. Innovators' playground and investors' market. What does this mean? See, now we say that just before Renaissance was a period of darkness, was a period of death. That means almost 1/3 of the population being gone. Workforce was in dire need. Along with the workforce, they needed innovations, inventions, etc. Now, people who are going to innovate as well as invent, this is their time. Now for their innovation and invention to proceed, to carry forward their legacy, they needed investors. Now this is the market for them. Now this is the playground for innovators and inventors, and this is the market for investors. That created the base for your Renaissance. That created the whatever we say, the growth of Europe, or from the modernity, from medieval history to what had come to modern history, is this Renaissance that is helping, or which provided the impetus to come into a new century, into a new light from that darkness. Anything in history, if you start to look at it with a soul, it will provide the course to chart out the map for the future. All you have to do is look at things the way it has a life. Every single thing, be it in history is not something that is past, that is dead. History is a thing that has so much life only when you learn to look at the soul of it. Okay? Now, we said that it's innovators' playground and investors' market. Yes? We said the output of it is your Renaissance. Okay? This Renaissance was coupled with the influx of thinkers from Greece. Okay, this phase also had a very important development, that is the virtue being man is important, our present life is most important. So anything that dealt with the new ideological changes, the thought, the mindset, the frames, everything revolved around this. Man is important, present life form is important rather than the afterlife. Okay, now look at the next line. Familiarity with death caused thinkers to dwell more on their lives on earth rather than on spirituality and the afterlife. A simple life that sums up the end of dark phases and the beginning of a new era. Now, let's look more into Renaissance. Now we can say Renaissance is a transition from Middle Ages to modernity. Okay. Now, the intellectual basis of Renaissance, whatever we said, the ideological base, that is humanism. The ideology now began to have human tendency or humanity at the heart of its principles. After whatever loss it saw, now it's going to base any of its ideologies centering around humanism. Now, this new thinking, what new thinking? Humanism. This new thinking, they started to apply to all the fields, be it art, architecture, politics, science, literature, etc. You name a field, they had it in it. Okay, now this is the phase we also see the contributions of the greatest of greats, being your Michelangelo, Leonardo da Vinci, Dante, Petrarch, Ptolemy, everyone. Okay, now they started applying this innovation, invention, and your investors came into light with this field, most importantly, commerce. Now, this is what led to their invention, innovation, and investments in the field of navigation, and thus the discovery of new sea routes, be it to America or to India. Okay. Now, as in again, we are bringing back the same statement, innovators playground and investors market. That became a basis for your renaissance. A scientific revolution. Look at this word. Along with industrial revolution or whatever we call it, most and most of this is called a scientific revolution. Now, amidst all the things, I want you to look at one thing clearly. When we said there was a phase, there was a black phase, a dark phase where people didn't know what was causing a disease, they just witnessed dark deaths, mass deaths, they saw their loved ones being dying in front of their own eyes, the phase of pain, all these things coupled with, their entire morale had shaken up about the society. They didn't know what was happening. Now, have we witnessed anything like this in the recent past? In the name of unknown disease, we didn't know what the disease was. Large scale mass death, yes. Wars, shaken up society, broken economy, bludgeoned psyche. And this term, we have used it almost 2 times in the slides prior, revenge spending. We'll look into this, what it is, in the next class. But among all these things, have you seen? Now this we saw, this was the phase that was experienced in the Dark Ages. Does anything come into mind that we saw in recent times which had all of these? Yes, your COVID-19. We have seen all these scenarios in our recent times too. Okay, the history tends to repeat itself at times. Now that being said, we have arrived at the end of our session. If there is a lesson that I want you to take away from this, is that yes, darkness is prevalent, be it in life, professional, personal, or any version of life that we are having in the present life, in the present living life. Yes, it is okay. Yes, it's fine that we have had all those things, but somewhere, a part, a segment, a slice of history teaches us that yes, the Dark Ages will not remain the same. We will have the Renaissance, we will have a revival, we will have a rebirth. That has to carry us forward. That is the hope that gives us to sustain. Thank you.